Thanks for staying with us. A meeting held on Monday, and we woke up to the headlines yesterday that GENCOs and Dissects are saying that they need at least 1.2 trillion naira bailout. That's what we saw, and it's at the same time the Senate President, in order for us to continue to have power supply, it was at the same time the Senate President was saying there is a need to declare a state of emergency in the power sector. But well, that's a good conversation. But 1.2 trillion naira bailout, everyone's attention was caught. So we decided to give it some attention this morning. And what do we need to do? Because without power, economic growth is going to be a mirage. That's what we have come to understand, and that's what we have at this moment. So we have with us this morning power sector practitioner and Mr. Arthur Usiago. Thank you very much for joining us. He's the MD of CCS Technologies. Thanks for your time here.
Thank you, Ayo.
First of all, when you saw this headline, were you shocked?
Basically, I wasn't shocked at all.
You weren't shocked?
At all, because...
were you expecting it?
I was expecting it. For 14 years, we started the power reforms in this country. From 2005, when the Electricity Reform Act was enacted. The idea was that a few years down the line, we should have serious improvement in the delivery of electricity to homes. But what has happened?
Before you go, what were the promises in that act?
Well, the act was quite clear that there is no need government being in business, that government should only carry out regulatory framework and ensure that the space is open for those who are interested in the electricity business to come in and change the terrain.
So how far gone are we in activating or executing that law?
Let me put it in perspective. You see, the electricity situation in Nigeria is like the proverbial old man who took his goat to the market to sell, sold his goat, and head on to the rope. The person that bought the goat wants to take the goat home, but the owner is still holding back. That is basically what is happening in this country.
How?
Now, after the reform, government sold the Dissects and still retained 40% equity in the Dissects. Now, you want the Dissects. The idea was that Dissects should recapitalize, improve all the infrastructure in the downstream electrical supply chain. But what happened was that government still withheld 40%. With this 40%, it became a bit difficult for the Dissects to take decision wholly on the supply chain. That's one. Government also kept 100% the transmission company of Nigeria. Okay? Now, the GENCOs, who government liberalized fully. But what happened? The gas supply became a big issue because the pricing of gas became a very, very serious issue because the price was not let out in such a way that those who are willing to deliver this gas can do it competitively. If government keeps on...
The price is controlled.
The price of gas is controlled. The current price of gas is not what is obtained in the international market. So it becomes very difficult for those who want to invest in that subsector to actually invest and make profit from their investment.
Some have invested, sorry, some have invested. Some bought, just as you said, equities in the Dissects, and some bought up the GENCOs. Some, government still has, some significant ownership. But there are already, investments by private sector practitioners in this thing. Now, many people are thinking, if you are now saying that you need this bailout, because this is not the first time you are very well aware, that some 2-3 years back, this whole bailout thing started. In fact, maybe, further, than that. Since 2014 or thereabout, this bailout thing has been going on. And, people are just wondering, look, if this is going to continue, isn't it then possible to say that, look, the people who bought into these, things didn't do their due diligence?
Well, if you look at the discourse, look at your environment, you clearly understand that since these discos were sold, there has not been any improvement in the infrastructure. Look at the lines, look at the feeder pillars, look at some of the substations. No improvement. Part of this reason is rhetorics from government. Discos were sold, but back then, there is still this strong rhetorics from government that, maybe we may likely take back the sale of the discos. And as a businessman, when you are not sure, when there is huge inconsistency on part of government, it's difficult for you to go to either primary or secondary market to borrow money and invest in this infrastructure because you may not know what will happen. So these dislocations is creating very negative, huge negative ripples in the electricity supply chain business.
I'd like us to simplify things, Mr. Oswago. Now, two questions have plagued me the most in life.
Yeah.
My life so far. One is that of purpose. I've made considerable advancement in that. But the second one is simple. Why can't we have stable power supply? And I'm sure I speak for millions of Nigerians. This is not a 10-year issue. This is not a 20-year problem. This is not a 30-year problem. I know you know where I'm going. So is there a simple answer to why we can't have stable power supply in Nigeria?
Yeah, it's very simple. The government is caught in between the devil and the deep blue sea. Government is looking at providing services for the citizen. But the cost of doing that is becoming increasingly huge for government because government has so many other areas, crying for funding. Government cannot do it alone. We have the telecommunication roadmap, which liberalized everything. And today, telecoms in Nigeria is 100% in the hands of the private sector. And you and I remember some years back, we used to buy a SIM for about 40,000, 35,000.
Those industries are different.
No,
the peculiarities
it's not different. See, it's not different. It's just for government to take the bull by the horn.
Let me sorry, just one moment. One quick difference. We have mobile phones, so you can just place infrastructure somewhere for telecoms, and we receive services wirelessly. We can't do the same for power sector.
It's still the same thing. They see, business is business. You generate electricity in your homes. You buy generators, and you run the supply to your home, and you can as well.
It's not wireless.
It's basically the same. It's even easier because you are not transmitting like the telecoms. You transmit through radio frequency, but this is physical. You have to run lines from point A to point B. And once you do that, it's enduring. It takes a long time, before you can come back for some, physical rework or maintenance.
A major issue that is plaguing, the industry, I'm sure you're aware, many experts like you in the sector have said that of the GENCOs, and Dissects, the weakest link is the discos. Why is that so, really?
That's what I was trying to explain to you. The discos don't have enough funds to invest in improving the facilities.
Please explain that.
Now,
because they knew all the infrastructure that was on ground before they signed the dotted lines.
That was why I told you that government sold these entities and still held back
Does
some
that
equity.
mean that the discos have been limited by government?
Now, another issue is the tariff. Government should divest completely from the discos, okay? And allow market price to determine the actual cost of electricity per kilowatt hour. Currently, electricity is around 28, 30, but that is not the actual market price. Yes, it's going to create some problem in a short term. But in a long term, it's going to give opportunities for the Discos to bring in funds and improve this infrastructure.
So, in other words, you're
the tariff
saying,
is wrong.
Okay,
It's highly subsidized the way it is.
We need to go to Abuja to take other perspectives on the same issue, but in other words, you're saying that the 1.2 trillion naira bailout being requested, so to speak, by the GENCOs and Discos is justifiable.
It's even more than that. But if you do that now, in the next 3 years, you should be ready for another bailout. So that's why I'm advocating that government should divest completely.
Should government give them the bailout now or not?
I don't. We need to change some regulation.
Okay.
Because our regulation is weak as it is.
All right. Let's go to Abuja for another perspective on this issue. Markwe.
Well, sorry, my panel is not gender-friendly this morning, but at least we provide some balance in putting things in perspective. We have with us this morning Rahila Thomas, who is Country Director, Energy Market and Rates Consultant. We also have with us Joy Ogaji, who is Executive Secretary of the Association of Power Generation Companies. Ladies, you're welcome to Sunrise Daily. And I'm just happy to say that. The last time you were here, Joy, you were here up in arms with the bulk electricity trader. Bulk trader. Has that been resolved?
I don't really know what answer to give to you, whether to say yes or a no. If you recall, the last time I said we have written to the regulator, we have not heard back from the regulator as of this morning. So we received a letter from the bulk trader following government's intervention that money should not be charged. However, what has been given to us is more like what the Americans would call a catch-22 situation. Now, why is it that? We've been told that we have to pay 100% of our gas invoices when we are paid 100%, which is okay for the GENCOs. They are willing to pay that. However, there are some issues around the gas invoicing. And this issue is relative to what we call an efficiency model, which Embed has introduced. Now, what is the efficiency model?
We will not have time to go into all of the details. We just wanted to know whether the controversy, which, sort of threat of you saying, well, we're going to shut down and the whole country will be in a blackout situation, whether that situation has been resolved. That's what we wanted to know.
We're in the process of resolving it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Now, I'm going to read you quickly here a quote from the roundtable which held on Monday. The Senate convened a roundtable on electricity sector. And the Senate President says, from the electricity power reform of 2005 to the privatization of GENCOs and Discos and to what is happening today, we know that everything is a fraud. If we play the ostrich, in the next 10 years, we'll be talking about the same things. Those are the words of the Senate President. He believes that everything that has happened so far in the power sector is a fraud. Do you agree with him?
Well, that is the Senate President's view of what he has seen in the sector. And I guess that's also coming from the fact that there's so many things that are not very clear in the sector. So many arguments here and there. So there's no clear direction.
Give us an example of some of the things that are not clear.
For example, let's talk about the bailout. I mean, the term that GENCOs and Discos are demanding for a bailout is untrue. When you talk about bailout, a bailout is given to an industry or a company that is about declaring bankruptcy, is about to die. So the monies we're talking about here is for a product or a commodity that has been taken, has been utilized, and you need to pay for it. So when we are talking about, I wouldn't like to use the word bailout, is an intervention. So why do you need an intervention? I think that's the question. So you have an industry that is charging a tariff that has different components in it. And as we know it, the value chain has generation, transmission, and distribution costs. Mm-hmm. All of them have to make investments to ensure that we have electricity in our house. Now, when you put all they require, the generators, like, she was referring to gas. Gas constitutes about 60% of a generator's cost. So the generator puts that into the basket. The transmission company needs to invest in lines, transformers, substations, and all whatnot, put that cost into the basket. And the discos need to make similar investments, put that. That generates a tariff. Now, that tariff today at cost reflectivity is about 57 naira per kilowatt. But that is not being allowed to be charged. And I can appreciate why the government is saying now, well, you can't charge cost reflective because you've not provided services at the level to have customers pay for that. No problem. So you have capped the level of tariffs that I can charge. Today, the average tariff is about 30 naira. So what is being requested for by the generation companies and distribution companies is that gap. So between the 57 and the 30, somebody must feel it. And I guess it's also important to state here that in this business, there's only two people that pay for tariffs. It's either you and I as customers pay, or the government plugs the gap. So it's the gap that that government is coming in to say, well, I have to put it on the table because there's a gap. So it's not a bailout. It's the fact that the government has taken a decision that we cannot charge full cost reflective tariffs at this moment. There's a gap and we need to fill it up. That's just what it is.
If you put the words Nigeria, power, bailout, and Google it and see, it throws up very, very interesting results.
Yeah.
I'll give you some of the results it shows. Nigerian government has given 1.5 trillion naira in bailouts to power sector. It's a report. Senate frowns on bailout funds for power sector. Buhari signs 600 billion naira intervention fund for power sector. World Bank's bailout to Nigeria power sector hits 1.3 billion naira in 4 years. Nigeria takes $3 billion from World Bank to tackle power crisis. These are stories that immediately pop up. They're humongous amounts of money. And so Nigerians have, of course, very good reason to question where all of this money is, because we know that only recently the $3 billion was actually approved by the World Bank. And this is not included into other monies that have also been given by the federal government before now. One of the reasons why the GENCOs were up in arms with MBET was because of the, 750 billion approved by the federal government? 701 billion approved by the federal government to meet that gap. Isn't that right? So where precisely are we? In spite of all the monies that have been, given for, approved for investment, for fresh investment, because we know that fresh investments need to be made in the area of transmission, generation, I think we're still okay in that area, and also distribution. In spite of all of these monies, how come we're still doing, or we're still performing, below optimum?
That's a very good question, and thank you for your interest and the research you've carried out on what is happening in the power sector. Those of us who operate in the power sector, also when we read this news, we're taken aback, because when you hear there's an intervention just approved by the World Bank, and you can't really see the specific area that money is going into. Exactly. Is it for distribution? Is it for generation? Is it for transmission? We're not aware. All we see on the headline is World Bank has approved X amount of money for power sector. So why we have been at our current post is as a result of what I call a silo-sized way of running the power sector. I've told a few people that want to listen that the power sector, the way we're dealing or we're treating the issues of the power sector is like that of the 6 blind men and the elephant. Today, somebody will come and say, I have the solution to the power sector. Meanwhile, he only has touched the leg of the elephant. And then the other one say, no, I have the totality. And it's only the tusk. And we are just going round and round. So the round table that was called by the Senate was something is applaudable. In fact, after the meeting, I went behind and I had to personally thank the senators, because we as investors and stakeholders have been calling for this roundtable meeting. If you've been following the power sector before now, when Professor Batinaji was the Minister of Power, we regularly used to have this sort of meeting we call every quarterly power sector retreats. So where we move out of Abuja or the busy cities and go to a quiet place, and every stakeholder comes up with his or her issues, and right there and then we try to trash it out. That has not happened for a long time. We've been trying to mimic by holding one power sector stakeholder meeting or the other, and in those meetings, rather than allow stakeholders to speak, it has been like an headmaster hounding down what should be done. And so in the process, the stakeholders are not able to express their feelings, but this roundtable meeting, we were allowed to speak. In fact, the media was asked to leave so that we can speak frankly. And I'm glad that we spoke as much as we could, and I thank the senators for staying from morning till evening.
So can you tell us some of the solutions that came out of the roundtable and what you see as the problems that we're facing? You know, of course, problems will definitely come before the solutions. What were some of the problems that were tabled? But I want to deal more from the point of view of solutions. What were some of the solutions that came out of it?
Some of the solutions that I saw came out was, although the solutions are still being worked on, because today there's another meeting, a stakeholder committee will be meeting to discuss further on the solutions, because one day was not really enough to deal with all the solutions. However, some of the solutions that we're looking at is the possibility of reinforcing some of the institutions of government. There has been institutional problem. And most of the agencies that operate in the power sector need one reinforcement or the other, but then they are not revealing that weakness to their principals. So in the process, the stakeholders or the investors who are operating are getting frustrated. Today you hear one regulation, tomorrow another regulation, and they are not synergizing. There is no harmony. Recently, you must have heard the current minister pronounce that there is willing buyer, willing seller. And the media calling me, oh, Joy, please, can you tell us the meaning of willing buyer, willing seller?
Eligible customers.
Is it different from eligible customer? And I was like, I need to read the policy document to really know what that directive is all about. So pronouncements are made here and there. Oh, Siemens electrification roadmap, then a power sector recovery plan. It's just one policy or the other. So there is no synergy, there is no harmony, and we don't really know where we're going to. So if we call more of this sectorial meeting, we will be able to trash out the issues.
Okay, quickly, let me ask you this. You are saying that there's a difference that needs to be paid.
Yeah.
A government is supposed to be meeting that particular need. Are they meeting it?
Well, in 2018, they provided the 701 billion for exactly the same purpose. There's a gap. You can't charge cost-reflective tariffs. There's a gap, and we need to cover that gap because the distribution companies can't pay for what you have not allowed them to get. So the 600 billion, which you've also heard about and you referenced, for 2019 is also to cover the same gap. That will go up until June 2020. But to your question about what solution is on the table, I think one of the fundamental points that came out from the Senate roundtable is the issue around financial viability. Now, financial viability speaks to the bankability of an industry. Now, the way the power sector is today, it's not bankable. What does bankability require? A number of things. One is security over your investments. That's number one. The second thing is stability. You want stability in regulation, in policy. I mean, Joy just referenced the flip-flops, you know, today here, today they say this.
And the third one?
And then the third one will be cash flow. Your cash flow that assures you a return on your, a recovery of your capital and a reasonable return on that capital. And if you don't have this, then it's hard for investments to come.
Ladies, I'm afraid I have to wrap you up. I mean, we've barely scratched the surface and we have to go. But power is an ongoing conversation. And I know that is something I will certainly bring you back here very soon. Thank you so much for coming on Sunrise Elite this morning. Regular Thomas is Country Director, Energy Markets and Rates consultant, and also Joy Ogaji is Executive Secretary of the Association of Power Generation Companies. Back to you now, Ayo.
Well, unfortunately, Mark, I really was hoping that we'll be able to take this further, but I have just got instruction from my director that we have to call this off now. Mr. Arthur Usiagu, MD, CCS Technologies and Power Sector Practitioner, thank you so much for your time. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So we're back in a moment to take on another issue that you will love. Please stay with us.